I trust everyone has had a great Christmas and Boxing Day. And I know that many people thought that today would be a free day and we wouldn't have a press conference. So I was overloaded on Boxing Day with people texting me all day finding out when the press conference was. I needed a day off. But so I told them today, and I plan to just address a few issues because people have a long weekend ahead of them and hopefully an enjoyable weekend. And although we as a party sent out greetings to every Guyanese and best wishes for the season, I want to do so again. I met tons of people shopping and enjoying the festive season. A lot of positive comments about where our country is going. We have seen a large influx of Guyanese from abroad, and they are enjoying themselves too, and I think many of them are pleased with the direction in which development is taking place in our country. A lot of them have asked me about how they can reintegrate back into the Guyanese society, many who left a long time ago, and how they can receive assistance in some regards for that reintegration process. This just did not happen over the holiday season. It's been happening a lot whenever we travel or even through direct contact with the party and the government. A lot of our people who live abroad, many of them are thinking about migrating back home, and I hope that they do so. Of course, carefully. They have to carefully plan it because it's a big step you take when you move back after you've uplifted all connections with this country for a long while. Many of them have gone for a long while. But I want them to know, those who are abroad, that we will do whatever it takes to ensure that they can be properly integrated back into our society. I want to assure all Guyanese that we will continue as a party and government to work to fulfill the promises we made when we contested the last elections. We don't take our promises lightly. We are working every single day, even throughout this period, to ensure that we have an early budget next year so that we can continue with the development tasks that we have laid out for our country. And so when you don't hear too often from the government, it doesn't mean that people are not hard at work. Next week, many ministers would be holding their annual press conference, as I had indicated last week. Some of them are busy in the budgetary process now. And once they hold those press conferences, you would have in greater detail some of the achievements that we have accomplished over the past year in much more granular ways than the general way that I speak of these achievements at our press conferences here at the party level. So I'm looking forward to those two because it would fill a gap that we've had where people say that they don't have enough information. I've seen a lot of the information out in the public domain from the ministries, posted to sites, etc. But somehow there are many who believe that the information has to come only directly from the ministers or the people who head the ministries. And so that will happen next week. I just wanted to share a few thoughts about what and information about what happened since our last press conference. You know, the electricity woes that we've been having as a country. We explained it many times. It's a result of a short-sighted approach by the previous government when they opposed the Milers Fall project from 2011, when they had the majority in the parliament. They opposed the project then. They killed the project that should have come on stream in 2017. They never made an investment in a base load capacity that would have replaced a miler. If they didn't proceed with a miler, then it should have been replaced by something else. They never did that. So we were left in government when we resumed office with practically the same old equipment that we left office with very, and in a situation where the economy was expanding and demand was increasing with very little investment in T&D. And so since then, we have made significant investments. We've added maybe 100 megawatts of about installed capacity, or we're adding 100 megawatts of installed capacity through fossil fuel and solar. And now we have purchased and have installed nearly another 100 megawatts through the power ships. So about 200 megawatts of capacity we're adding to the system. The transmission mains are still old, and but now, given what happened the last week, where the power ship sailed into the Demerara River and was connected to the grid a few nights ago, and that has allowed us now to, we have 267 megawatts of power installed, with the demand in October was about 205 megawatts, peak demand. It is now about 200 megawatts. So we have about 67 megawatts of reserve for the first time after a long time. So now GPL has reserves. They're using part of it as spinning reserves. And this would allow them to take out some of the other sets that have had delayed maintenance and do that maintenance now without affecting the availability of power in the system. We're expecting, as the President said, better levels of performance now that they have the adequate amount of power to meet the demand. In fact, they have way beyond what the peak demand is. So I'm very pleased that this has happened in the last week, and we don't expect to have blackouts the way we had because of shortage of power or the availability of power. There may be blackouts associated with faults in the transmission system from time to time, a pole faults or anything of that sort. But it should not originate from the lack of power. This was done with a great deal of effort, and it is a transitional measure until we get the new power station, the gas to energy project implemented. So that was a positive development this week, that we had the power ship connected to the grid, and now we have reserve capacity in the system. The second positive thing that took place this week was the Exim Bank approving a loan of $526 million to the gas to energy project. Now, you would recall that when I mentioned that the initial approval had been given and that it had to go to the Congress, the United States Congress, for notification for a particular period, 35 days, and then it will get back to the board of the Exim Bank for final approval. Immediately thereafter, the AFC went and lied in the form of Patterson and Nigel Hughes. They lied, saying that they had some contact in the bank who they've been working with over the years, who said that the government is misleading the people of the country and that the loan was not approved and that the board had no intention of approving the loan. So this approval is positive, but it's also demonstrative of the extent of the lies that the AFC would tell. To quote a fictitious person saying that this project was not approved and will never be approved, and then bring that to the Guyanese public in a situation where it could have easily be proven otherwise, like now the result, their final approval has been made public by the US government. If you can lie to that extent in such a circumstance or set of circumstances, how many other lies would you tell or issues you would fabricate to just score cheap political points? And this is typical of the AFC especially. They'll lie in a pathological manner. So we are happy that the loan has been approved. For those people who've been saying, some people are saying, why did we need to borrow for this project? I want to remind them that this project, it will cost about $2 billion, and the loan is only about 25% of the project. So it's not 100% of the project. The rest is financed from our own resources and through an arrangement with ExxonMobil on the pipeline. And then the second thing, for those who have been saying, they have to find some negative. So they ask, why did we borrow for this project? I need to remind them that oil revenue is just 30% of the total budget. Funds only total 30% of the total budgetary expenditure. So just those 2 points. I'm not going to belabor those points because I think they're self-explanatory. I just want you to focus a bit on the press release that was issued by the US government. And it speaks about this project being part of the energy transition to more reliable, clean energy. So for those people who have been opposed to the project and saying it's a fossil fuel project, I just want to draw their attention to what the press release from Exim Bank pointed out, that it's greener energy. We will save 460,000 tons of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere by the implementation of this project per year. And that is equivalent to about 1 million barrels of oil or bunker C per year. Now, if you take 1 million barrels of oil per year and you're saving that, and the cost of a barrel of bunker is $100, see, approximately $100. That's a $100 million saving per year, US dollars saving per year, just on fuel. And this all came out of the press release that was issued here. And further, I pointed out that if you sell electricity at the price that we're gonna sell electricity at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, which is half of the price for that is currently obtained, that the consumers will save $250 million per year. So they will save that from lower electricity costs. We will save $100 million from just lower fuel costs. So it has an impact both on the balance of payment of the country and also in the pockets of Guyanese, companies and individuals. This is extremely positive. And all the naysayers who were saying the loan would never be approved because there was no due diligence done, no feasibility study done. Exim Bank contracted their own consultants to do feasibility studies of a technical and environmental nature before this loan went to their board. They had to answer all of those questions. This loan went to the United States Congress, and so it could have been blocked by the US Congress if we didn't have adequate answers, if the project was not a feasible one. For those who have been saying this all along, I hope that, I don't want to rub their noses in the dust, but this is a vindication of all that we've been saying all along. They're focused on whether the project would be done on time or delayed a bit. It does not matter for me. What matters for me is that the project is being implemented. It has the support of the US government through a loan. It has all of these positive aspects to the project, and it will be completed and deliver benefits to the people of this country. They think that we want the project to be done before the elections, and it's a crucial. That's why they're so concerned about it. But people seen this. They know that APNU would never have worked on a project like this. In fact, they could have made the same decision since 2016 to advance a project of this nature. They never did. And they have no technical capability to do so. And so whenever it's done, and we're hoping that it would be completed next year, then it would deliver all the benefits I spoke of. So this was the second major positive development just in the past week. The first, as I said before, was the connection to the grid and of the power ship, and GPL now having the reserves and spinning reserves. So On the cash grant, we have had an attempt once again by the opposition, after trying repeatedly to distort the facts surrounding the cash grant, to try to get people to stay away from it, to impute sinister motives to the government giving the cash grant, that we wanted to collect people's data for electoral purposes, etc. All of which have been debunked and rebuked. They've now come up with a new one. I see from the AFC now they're circulating that the last week it's the new that dead people are now on collecting the cash grant because somebody in Bartica called out a name or something like that. Not even with facts. They just made a statement, and one of their the persons who have been one of their, well, I don't know if they're leaders, they were sidelined by Nigel Hughes or stuff, finance or whatever, just kept posting all these things showing dead people in coffin receiving money and all of that sort of thing. This is the usual AFC way of an APNU way of distorting things. Now the Ministry of Finance dealt with that. They issued a press release, and I think they've put the matter to rest. That no dead person can collect a cash grant because they have to surface, they have to come and get registered themselves, have to take a picture of them, and then the process of delivering the checks have safeguards too. But you do have people with the same names but different ID cards. So you could have a Dennis Chabral who died a long time back, but we have a Dennis Chabral here who is alive. So it is the silliness that goes on all the time. But I think by now people have come to recognize that that's all that you will expect of the AFC and APNU. Around the fringes, trying to distort things. Can't handle big core issues. So far, I have a report here from the Ministry of Finance, and they've said that Region 1, they have delivered about 78% of the checks of the 16,035 checks delivered to the region. In Region 9, it's about 90% still, just over 90% now that have been distributed in that region. In Region 8, about 70% of the 6,538 checks sent there have been distributed. In Region 7, they have commenced now, so they just started distributing the checks there. And then they told me about maybe 90% of the people in the public sector they have distributed to about 90% of the public sector. And from Monday, they would start with the pensioners. So to give you some macro figures, they have registered so far 366,473 persons. They've printed 245,436 checks. And they have delivered just over 100,000 of those checks. So that's where we are in relation to the exercise. We expect, as I said last week, as soon as we get past, because the Ministry of Finance that manages this affair, or the distribution process, the registration and distribution process, they're also busy, the staff, with budget preparation. So it's overloading them a bit, and I want to thank all of the people who've been doing this under volunteers. They have done a great job so far in getting so many people registered. But they would start very soon in the other 5 regions of the country. As I said before, everyone will receive their checks. So this exercise is moving forward. As I said to people, a lot of people asked me when I walked around on Christmas Day when they're going to get their checks, and I told them to be a bit patient. A lot of money was in the system, though. It's over $18 billion that was just on wages and salaries alone, and the 10% and the back pay. Over $18 billion was in the system in the last few weeks alone. So a lot of people will get these issues. They get the checks. So I wanted to talk a bit about since I have oversight responsibility, not active day-to-day responsibility for the oil and gas sector, but more of an oversight role, to talk a bit more about changes today. And I had not decided whether I would have done this until a couple of minutes ago when I saw the press release, an editorial in the Starbuck News. And then it dawned upon me that I should really tell people how far we have come from first oil and the achievements that this government has made in those years. And this is necessary, and its repetition and reinforcement is necessary because of the persistent campaign to distort our achievements. And every time you think you explain it, then it's ignored or distorted once again. So I look at the Starbuck News editorial, and by the way, there are quite a few of these editorials. I asked my people to run them through the AI chat GPT, and a lot of these editorials they have a great deal of similarity. In fact, 98.68% coincidence with some minor changes. Another one, 90.3%. So a lot seem to be generated by AI and then adjusted, especially the lofty ones. You have like fear of retribution. You have a few others. So I don't know if this is the new way of writing editorials and then probably adjusting it for the local context. But it says here 5 years of oil and infamy. And the infamy that it accuses us of in the PPP is that we are to be blamed for the Stabroek block equally, the PSA, the Stabroek PSA, we're equally to be blamed for the distorted or the lopsided Stabroek Block PSA as APNU. And it also distorts. It speaks about us raiding the NRF again. And this is what the infamy is about. So that we don't have a depletion, three things they have at the end. The PSA, the oil depletion policy, and the NRF. And this qualifies the PPP as being equally bad as APNU, and the state of the oil sector is a bad one, because infamy means really a state of being where you have bad qualities or bad governance. So when I look around the world, what do we blame countries for that are producing oil and gas? You hear the following things. One, that the money is stolen. Almost every oil producing country, you hear about massive theft of oil money. That's a state of infamy. Two, that the money is spent on extravagance. The government becomes profligate and it builds palaces. I can tell you of a few countries that I've visited that are producing oil and gas, that have built palaces, and they're not in the Middle East. They're not in the Middle East. They're in countries where the per capita GDP is lower than in Guyana before oil. People build palaces using the oil money. They have fancy new fleet of vehicles, and they neglect spending on people and public services. The third thing you hear about in countries that produce oil and gas is that they don't spend on education and healthcare and public infrastructure. And then fourthly, you hear that they just don't spend on the non-oil economy. So what happens eventually, all the other sectors die off and they're just left with most of their revenue and GDP coming from the oil and gas sector. These are the four things that have characterized infamy globally. So let us look at Guyana's case and how we have fared in these four areas. First of all, in terms of stealing oil money, there is not a single bit of evidence that a cent of oil money is missing. In fact, it's all accounted for. So we have now, in the new law, unlike under APNU when they tried to steal the 18 million US dollars, we now have in the new law a provision that makes public every cent of receipt to the NRF. We have a clear provision where all the money transferred to the budget can be traced, and every cent in the budget has to be, before it's spent, has to be appropriated and under the Auditor General control. We have not had any dispute about whether any money is stolen, unlike in the APNU period. So that's one. In Guyana's case, we should have been getting high marks for that, because the countries around the world that are producing oil and gas, they don't have the draconian provisions that we have put in our laws to prevent this from happening, including oversight. You don't hear much about that. Secondly, you don't see the money being spent on building a new building for the office of the president, like we've had that, or buying fleets of vehicles for the government, even without oil money. Look at APNU. They were spending 600 million Guyana dollars per year buying new fleets of vehicles. President Granger left with the most expensive vehicle ever purchased for a head of state. He left office with that. We allowed him to take it. You don't see that. Where do you see the money going? Into education, healthcare. You see it going massive investments in infrastructure, roads for our people, not roads for the politicians, etc. Power plants. That's where you see the money being spent. Thirdly, you see a big focus on the non-oil economy to ensure that we have a more diversified economy. So massive focus on that. I don't want to list the details. You will hear about this next week when the minister speaks about this. Tissue culture labs, opening up new sectors, bringing in better quality animals, giving greater incentives, co-investing in the agricultural sector and other sectors to expand the economic base of the country. So these are just some of the provisions there, that when you look at other countries providing oil, that's that makes them infamous. That's the infamy we're talking about relating to oil money. Stolen money, extravagance, not focusing on the future, not investing in public service. In every single case in Guyana, we have demonstrated that that's where the money is going. So as it relates to the PSA, the infamy they're saying is that your APNU put a provision, they signed the PSA, but we're to be blamed because we did not renegotiate the PSA. But there is a provision in the PSA which says that the other side must agree to the renegotiation, and if they don't, and Exxon has already said they don't, then you have a dispute, you have to go to arbitration. That is what this country, in an agreement, nobody put a gun to Granger's head to sign that. They voluntarily signed this. They signed it, they approved it. If you go to arbitration, what would be the outcome? It would be we breached the agreement because they didn't agree to the provision that the government of Guyana in 2016 put there, that you can only have renegotiation if both parties agree to do this. But we get blamed for this equally like APNU. Who put in that provision? Who put in the provision which lacks ring fencing, the low royalty rate, There are no taxes. So the PPP gets lumped in. 5 years of oil and infamy. We get lumped into that. That's part of the infamy. They never speak about what we have done. So we, unlike Norway, which started saving after 25 years, we started saving right from the beginning. That's a positive thing too, for intergenerational equity. There are many countries that have produced oil and gas for 60 years, they don't have a local content policy. We have one. 1,000 Guyanese companies are already benefiting from over 700 million of business. They didn't see that as positive. They didn't see now that you have to go to auction. Nobody can call you in and give you an oil and gas contract anymore. The PPP changed that. You have to get it only through an auction, an open, transparent process. They don't have anything to say about the new PSA that we put in place with new royalty rates and new fiscal regime totally for the PSA. Don't have anything to say about this stronger environmental permits that we have issued with provision, even a carbon tax. They can't say a single thing about the new law that we have put in place, updating the one from 1986. So all of that gets lumped in with APNU and their infamy. So if you really want to talk about what has happened in the 5 years since First Oil, it's been an exciting period for us. We have made significant changes to the regime under which we can monitor and regulate the oil and gas sector, new laws, regulations, etc. We have kept our commitment to have a new PSA, and effectively we have renegotiated the 5 contracts outside of the Stabroek contract, because now the new PSA would be applicable to them. We have passed a local content law. All of these things have been done by this government. And we have utilized every cent of oil money in the areas that will benefit our people. This is a success story. It's not infamy. And even the part where they spoke about the NRF, they go back to this whole point. In recent days, the mind-boggling extractions from the NRF, right? So it's been the position of this newspaper from the outset that the formula that was enshrined in the PPP civic government's version of the Natural Resources Fund Act effectively neutered the NRF board. So the formula that we put in place neutered the NRF board. Now, there was no NRF board. We put the NRF board. How could you neuter the board when the minister had the power? There was no board in the APNU version of the law. There was no board, period. So how could we insert a formula to neuter the board when the minister had all the powers to decide how much money will be taken from the NRF? The minister, in his sole discretion, decided how much money would have come from the NRF to the Treasury. Now it is formula based. Nobody has a discretion. And this is a stupid thing to say, that we put in a formula to neuter the board when there was no board. We put the board in place because we didn't want the minister to exercise the power. And you heard about the names of the people on the board. Compton Bourne, a former president of the Caribbean Development Bank. Joe Singh, former head of the army. and a prominent civil society activist. Dunstan Barrow, a former PNC MP responsible for economic affairs. Caroline Rodriguez, former minister, now at the UN, and Ramesh Duku, who is in management at banks DIH, and represents private sector. Before that, there was no board. None of these individuals, Jordan would have exercised, or the Minister of Finance alone. In this case, if we didn't make no changes, Ashni Singh every year would sit in his office and say, this is how much money we'll collect this year. Forget formula. There was no formula. There was no board. He would have decided himself. That's what they wanted. So you tell me which is good governance. And we get criticized for doing that. We neutered a board that was non-existent. So this is, the editorial just reminded me that we have to keep speaking of this all the time. Because next week I suspect they're going to come with the same nonsense and the lies again to try to diminish the success that this government has made. We in every single area, we have made great strides. And unlike the infamous behavior in many other parts of the world with oil and gas money, you didn't find that here in Guyana. You can trace every cent, you can see it going to things that are visible to the people of this country, that will change their lives. I suspect they think the $100,000 is a waste of time too. That it shouldn't have gone there. So that's just one thing. It allowed me really to come back to talk about the sector, because we have made significant gains there. What is our depletion policy? We made it clear. We explained our depletion policy from day one, and why we were pursuing that depletion policy in the context of net zero, global net zero. We have explained our depletion policies over and over again, but it will never be accurately reflected. But this might have been AI generated too, I don't know. This one doesn't look like that. It has too many things from the PPP. So, since I'm on editorials again, it's interesting to see how these things could be sneaked in, these guest editorials. And I use Stabrook because I see them as a more serious newspaper. And I think it's a lapse here, because they get a lot of these guest editors they're not accountable, because their names, you don't see their names. So I don't think the high standards of the newspaper would be maintained in these editorials, but they just allow you a snippet of thinking into how they can minimize our achievements and normalize APNU's transgressions. That is their purpose, minimizing the achievements of the PPP and normalizing APNU AFC's wickedness. And so again, the fear of retribution, the editorial. So it speaks generally about how in Guyana people are fearful of retribution from those in power. So they remain silent and they don't challenge, say, the government, etc., because they're fearful of retribution. And that it doesn't come only from politicians, it comes from various places in society. That's the whole idea behind the editorial. But look how it omits major sections of our history and then try to blame the thing. Both sides are the same. Again, like with the last one, 5 years of infamy. Both sides are the same. APNU and the PPP. So, again, this one. The fear of retribution in Guyana can be traced back to the country's colonial past, where political power was often wielded by a select few and dissent was met with harsh punishment. In post-independence Guyana, this fear was further entrenched as political parties, particularly the two major ones, came to represent more than just ideological differences. They became symbols of ethnic and regional divide. So that's the explanation. So that's not what happened after we gained independence. After we gained independence, you had a party, the PNC, that rigged elections to stay in power. The PPP was not part of the power structures until 1992. So first of all, they rigged elections to stay in power. Two, in that period, we had the killing of political opponents. Father Dark was killed when they were protesting on the street against the government. He was killed by the PNC. Walter Rodney, a prominent scholar and a political leader, the commission of inquiry that we had into his death concluded he was killed by the PNC with the knowledge of the Prime Minister at that time. We didn't have the president at that time. The head of government was the Prime Minister. He was killed. Political opponents were killed for their politics and their belief. Scores of people were thrown in jail for what they said about the government. We had, in that era, the army, the military, fetching ballot boxes, and in Berbice, when the polling agents and they tried to stop the stealing of the ballot boxes, they were shot down and killed by the army stealing ballot boxes. We had in that period the doctrine of the paramountcy of the party, where the party flag flew over the courts in our judiciary, higher than the national flag. The party's flag was higher than the national flag on the court. We had, in the very same period, no free media, where people had to smuggle newsprint into the country to print their paper. The Catholic Standard, the Mirror, they banned newsprint. Only the government could get newsprint. There was no independent newspaper at that time. Or the radio was controlled by the government. No free media. The subversion of almost every institution took place. You had to have a party card to get a job. So they glossed that whole period over by the fear of retribution to say, oh, in the period after independence, the two parties are to be blamed for the culture of fear in our society. Culture of fear and retribution. When it was all APNU, and the impunity with which they acted. Hamilton Green was a terror in the country. Was a terror. People were scared of him. If you go back to that period. You had goon squads beating up people at their public meetings. The House of Israel. And Joe Hamilton was from the House of Israel. He could tell you a lot of stories about how they were sent out to beat up people at political meetings. So to equate the PPP and the PNC and the AFC with the same culture of retribution and fear, that is a very clever way of normalizing our history to make the villains of that period, the ones who use fear and retribution as a tool to subjugate people, you give them a free pass by blaming everyone. And so that could have only happened. You know why? Because we didn't have a free media, we didn't have an independent judiciary, and we did not have free and fair elections. In democracies where people have to go out and hunt for votes, political parties based on your track record, it is a humbling thing for the parties. They have to go, you can't bully people into voting for you. But if you're voting for them, it doesn't matter what they think. Or you don't have to give them any service. You can't go and seek their vote. You don't have to seek out their vote. And that is what happened. The impunity in government, the culture of fear and retribution developed under APNU. And today, look at the contrast today. We have a free media. You don't find people when they criticize us that you're gonna get them to go get locked up or anything like that. You know, nobody gets locked up. This is a free country. The judiciary has gone back to its independent state. The army, you don't see the role of the army in stealing people's votes anymore. They've gone back to being a professional body. And it took time to rebuild these institutions because they're all politicized. So when you talk about culture of fear, etc., you can't minimize that period, but that is how this editorial passed it off. And then look at another way of normalizing everything else. So the masses seem to accept almost passively the abuses and empty promises of their leaders, whether under the government of the People's Progressive Party or the People's National Congress or the APNU AFC. The Guyanese people have learned to expect little and tolerate much. When politicians make grand promises during election campaigns, it is not so much disbelief that follows, but a quiet acceptance of the futility of hope. They're keenly aware of the discrepancies between what the politicians promise and what they deliver. So we have made delivering on our promise the hallmark of our party and our campaign. APNU has a record of promising. I can go through their manifesto in 2015, and they did not achieve 5% of what they promised. On the other hand, they promised less taxes, they increased taxes. They promised more jobs, they took away jobs from people. They promised greater welfare, they took away welfare from children, pensioners, the joint services, etc. I can give you a long list. They promised help for production and productivity. They put taxes on mining, on forestry, and agriculture. They promised clean government. They became the most corrupt government. Look at their promises. It's easy to check their promises and see what they delivered. The person who wrote the editorial could have done this. It's easy to check our promises now. What did we promise? We promised to restore the joint services bonus. Look at our promises. I can bring them, it's black and white. We did it. We promised to increase the children's grant. restore it and increase it to $50,000. It will get to that next year in the 5 years. We promised free university education. We're doing that. In the 5 years, we're going to do that. We promised 20,000 scholarships. We're doing 28,000 on goal already in 4 years, and 50,000 if you add the other programs, WIN and BIT, etc. We promised to restore the pensioners' water subsidy and electricity subsidy. We did it. Promised to resume the land titling activities. We resumed it. We promised to remove all the taxes on production, machinery, and equipment. We did that. We got a long list of promises we made, and we delivered. Every week I talk about that. But cleverly, this editorial says, oh, all the parties do this. It is trying to help the other side. Oh, forget them. Forget them. And oh, forget the PPP, what they're talking. They're all the same, the politicians. Well, it's not true. It's not true. This is a clever attempt to try to help the APNU and AFC by going after politicians generally. They don't keep their promises. We've kept our promises to the people of this country. We said we'd generate more jobs. You have 60,000 people more working now. More people are working. So this is a clever way, and it comes in the form of these seemingly innocuous articles, erudite, generated by AI, so it's very lofty and all of that sort of thing. But it has a clever motive all the time. As I said before, diminish all that the PPP has achieved. Play down their successes. And magnify what APNU didn't even have, their successes, or normalize their transgressions. Normalize their transgressions and their disastrous period in government. And so that brings me to another attempt now to normalize again in what has happened surrounding the last elections. So this week I saw President Granger writing a letter to the Starbuck News and to others. It was published here that he never declared victory in the 2020 elections. And there has been quite a bit of discussion in the public domain about this matter. So for people to have an appreciation of the origin of this issue and the perspective that we want to share, I need to address this matter. I would not have otherwise addressed it. So the entire matter surfaced because of the case where I said that Cathy Hughes is a lowlife. I pointed out in that case, well, they filed, Nigel Hughes sued me, and they complained to the ERC. The ERC has already ruled on the matter. They tried to make it a race issue. It had nothing to do with race. So in the press conference, when I called her a lowlife, I said that she, which she has admitted now, that she knew that I never made, and she's admitted this in the box, that I did not make the offer of a channel our waters to Venezuela as part of the settlement. That what I said when I was interviewed in 2016, I said, aware that this offer was made. We now know that the offer, and it's documented, was made by the PNC government. For months they vilified me that I'm selling out Guyana, I'm weak, I was weak as president, that I'm undermining our territorial integrity and sovereignty. They had a field day at this with this lie. But they knew otherwise, that I did not make the offer, that they did. She then went to Linden in the middle of the controversy with Venezuela, when they were threatening to invade our country, and said to repeated the thing, the lie to the people in Linden in a meeting, and called me a wicked man. So the people in Linden would believe that I sought to undermine our territorial integrity, and not just as a private individual, as the president of Guyana. So that could only mean only a lowlife would do that sort of thing. So that's what I said. And secondly, I believe that only a lowlife would say to the public, and I'm commenting on this matter now, I know it's before the courts, but since it's Nigel Hughes has been speaking about it everywhere, and he's been posting on the case, so I think that gives me latitude to also comment on the matter. So it's public knowledge that when asked in 2016, I think it was, Cathy Hughes said, I no longer have day-to-day control over my company, Video Mega. In 2018, it surfaced that Cathy Hughes was signing checks on behalf of Video Mega, the company that she owned. So she lied to the media when she was asked about the conflict of interest. She said, I have no day-to-day control over that. I've exited the company. But then if you're signing checks on behalf of the company, that meant you had to have day-to-day control over the company. But what was most disgusting and egregious, that she was approving in her ministry as minister invoices, and we have copies of all of these, to her own company that she was signing checks on behalf of. Tell me if that's not unethical, if not unlawful. So I thought that's low-life behavior too. And then the third issue was about their role in GCOM trying to steal the elections. So in the cross-examination of one of my witnesses, who was just going to go there to talk about his understanding of what a low-life is, the question was posed, I think, about, so Nigel Hughes, now as the lawyer for Cathy Hughes, is trying to defend now. I don't think he was successful in defending the other two issues, so he's trying to defend the third one about elections. So whilst we're talking about him apologizing and his party apologizing for trying to rig the elections in 2020, he's busy. I don't know if it missed anyone, because that didn't come out in the article about Granger. If we missed it, that he's busy in court now, still trying to argue two things. One, that 33 is not the majority of 65. He's still trying to argue that case now, after the CCJ has pronounced on this matter already. The highest court, with all the judges sitting there, they've pronounced that 33 is the majority of 65. In the case now in the court, today, in 2024 December, long after the CCJ had ruled on that matter, when it's clear for every right-thinking person, he is in court in the Catius case against me. He is trying to defend that position. So that's one. And two, he's trying to defend the position that they really didn't try to rig the elections. Hence, this issue with President Granger, the question as to whether he declared or not came up in the court case. So I needed to give that context of what's happening now in the court. He's still trying to defend the position that they didn't steal the elections. Now contrast that with him when asked about whether they would apologize for their role, said he'd have to do a study to examine whether they actually tried to steal the elections. And then they falsely blame GCOM for delaying their review, their study. Falsely blame GCOM, and GCOM has responded to that matter. So let us deal with this issue on its merit now. Now that you have the context of why the Granger issue came up. So I have here a report of the Commission of Inquiry and their findings. This is the Commission of Inquiry on the elections of 2020 and the summary of their findings. Now, this is an international group that was put together with local prominent people that took evidence, and these are their findings. I'm going to only read two bits of this so to make my point. Senior GCOM officials abandoned all need for neutrality and impartiality and demonstrated a bias for a competing political party, and in the course of events over those days showed an open connection with that party, and by their efforts sought a desired result for that party. So that is clear. That's the finding of the COI. And then another clause says, from the totality of the evidence surrounding the RO's declaration, there appears to be such collusion and collaboration between senior GCOM officials as to likely amount to a conspiracy to make what was undoubtedly a premature and unlawful declaration of falsified results, which showed the APNU AFC party as the winner of electoral district number 4. This was the ultimate goal of the CEO, the DCO, and the RO. So clear, the ultimate goal of these three individuals was to falsify results to show that APNU AFC won in Region 4, and with that win in Region 4, they would have had the majority and would have won the 2020 elections. Clear as day. You don't need interpretation of this. This is from the Commission of Inquiry into the elections. So when President Granger says, I never declared victory, that has to be taken in context of what happened on that day. On the 5th, and I saw the Starbuck News using quotations from the Chronicle from the 5th, his speech of the 5th of March 2020 to his supporters, to say he never declared victory or at that meeting. So earlier that day, you had Mingo, who went to stood up in GCOM and actually declared the falsified results earlier in the day that showed that APNU had won region, APNU AFC had won Region 4. So President Granger went in that evening to the venue where they were celebrating, the people there were gathered to celebrate victory. He went to that venue with the knowledge that Mingo had already suggested in a falsified declaration that they won Region 4. So he's absolutely right. He did not declare victory at the elections because he could not declare the results of the elections. Constitutionally, there is only one body that can declare the elections results, and that's GCOM. And they have to follow a process. The ROs have to complete their declarations. Then these would have to be they have to be tabulated in a combined way by the CEO and then taken to the commission. And then the commission will deliberate on it, and then they would declare the results of the elections. So it was premature to declare the victory. And he's right when he said, I did not declare, GCOM has to declare. He was just stating the fact. He didn't have the authority to declare. GCOM has that authority, but he knew, or he must have known, that earlier in the day that there was a declaration in Region 4, or an attempted declaration by Mingo, that showed that they had won the elections. And hence, what did he say? Didn't declare. He could not have declared because only GCOM can declare, but he said, in the next 5 years, now for a right-thinking person, in the next 5 years, I promise to make your lives better. What does that mean? That you believe you've won the elections, you are there, you're just waiting on the formal process for the declaration, but you know already the falsified declarations, or must have known, they were made in your favor. It is about, it's just splitting hairs on this matter. Was there an attempt to steal the 2020 elections? The answer is an unequivocal yes. So whilst we are trying to get after technicalities, who spoke first, who spoke last, who declared, who did not declare, that's the COI has concluded that they attempted, the staff of GCOM tried to steal elections in favor of APNU AFC. Not just the COI. The CARICOM report, the OAS report, the Carter Center report, the EU report, all have the same conclusion. Every government around the world, sanctions were threatened. Why do you think that happened? Because there was a blatant attempt to steal the elections. And what we should have spoken about is not Granger's role in this all, because Cathy Hughes is the case in point here because of the earlier context that I gave, where this issue came up in the context of the low-life comment by me. She was directly involved in the attempt to. I have here a report from DPI of the 15th of June, and she said, among other cases detected, the public telecommunication minister reminded of the over 8,000 instances of fraud affecting 1,222 of the 2,339 total ballot boxes. She was aware of the fraud for 8,000 people. It was all a lie, a total lie. That's on DPI's page. And secondly, we are aware now that Patterson said that the statements of poll that they had matched Mingo's falsified results. So the AFC was deeply involved. It has nothing to do with what Granger said or didn't say there. It comes back to the AFC duplicitous role and Cathy Hughes' role in the rigging of the elections. So this is all a red herring for me. Who said what, when, etc. As though there was no attempt because somebody didn't declare or say, I am declaring the results of the elections, I won now. He was not authorized to do that. He had no authority under the Constitution to do that. But because he didn't say that, it suddenly wipes the slate clean of their attempt to rig the elections. And so I see that story as one way of normalizing, again, as though the whole case of stealing elections disappeared because one man says in a letter, I did not declare anything. Did President Granger know of this attempt or not? He was in charge. So these are, I thought there is important issues that we needed to get a perspective on. I see the PNC back again in court seeking an order for house-to-house verification of registrants to be conducted. So in this one now they're saying if we can verify your address and you're at that address, you can't vote. This matter has been dealt with by the courts already. The Constitution of Guyana is clear. Residency requirement was removed a long time ago. They're trying to get through a backdoor way to try to undermine the Constitution of Guyana again. And now it's even worse. They're saying, oh, even if you're registered, so if you're from, say, Paradise, and you registered at a particular address in Paradise, but you move now to Georgetown, and they don't find you at Paradise, you're gone. You're gone. So they want to find you at your address where you registered. It's the over and over again, and they keep losing in court, but it's back to the same old behavior. That's all I'm going to say this week. Thank you.
Mr. Jagdeo, then Shabral Damarawi. Yes. Sir, with respect to the cash grants, what new approaches or methods will be used to distribute the grant checks in an orderly manner, especially in the densely populated regions of the country, not only confined to teachers, but the wider population? Secondly, how much Guyana has to repay Exim Bank annually, and what is the interest rate? And thirdly, what is the status of the dispute with CHL and SECA as regards, I think it's now $166 million. I'm told it may have grown to that. And can you say how many public servants will be taking home about $140,000 and less as a result of the recent increases in salaries?
So the first one is, again, let me
Those
go
are
to
methods.
the better distribution. So I agree. I saw the situation with some public servants and teachers, and it should have never happened. And we need to devise in the ministries better ways of communicating with people. So if you are, there was a rush to try to get the checks out before the end of the year to as many people as possible, particularly the public servants. So often when people register, they then have to move to verification, and then the checks are cut. So as they were verifying, they were cutting the checks. So if they finish a batch of verification, they cut the checks. So that meant maybe in a ministry, you may have like 80% of the checks cut, and whilst the 20% have gone for verification. What happened is that they invited everyone out. And they said, come and collect. So the 20% of people who did not have their checks cut for that day, they showed up too in some cases. And they were disappointed, and it should have never happened. We should have had a better system to identify those and only invite those in. So we've spoken with the Ministry of Finance, and they have to move to a better system or have a more conscientious way of approaching it by the managers of the different agencies. So I agree that there may have been issues with people waiting too long and all of that. So that's a fair comment. It's a fair comment. And we do have to find ways of getting the distribution better. In the hinterland, they do more of the by villages and stuff. So it went more smoothly there. But if you have teachers coming from different places, etc., and then accumulated in a single spot, it leads to confusion at that spot. You could have done it in maybe a more dispersed fashion. So we need to do that. We need to make sure that we go as close as to where people are living, and it's convenient to them as far as possible. So that's a fair comment. In terms of the loan, the interest rate is 4%. So if you calculate it over the period, but remember their moratorium and all of that, so that it's a 4% interest. So you can calculate what the repayment would be over a time period. It's fixed at 4%.
And the time period you have, what's the moratorium and what will be the time period overall?
Yeah, I think it's 20 years, I think. 20 years. We were negotiating. 15 years, its principal repayment is 30 semi-annual installments due and payable on each November 1 and May 1st, beginning on May 1st, 2031. So that's when you start paying from, May 1st, 2031, and it would be for 30 semi-annual repayment. So it's 15 years thereafter.
And the status of the dispute with CH Linseka?
Yes, so right now there's one issue before the DAB. They had their oral presentations. There have been some additional claims by CH4 and Linseka, particularly as they relate to the soil condition. And those would have to go through the technical process to see whether they are justified or not.
And how much?
I don't want to comment on those because those matters could end up in arbitration. That has to go through a technical process when they submit their claims to we have an engineering company that oversees the contract. and they would have to give their views on the claim, whether it merits addressing or not.
And how much overall that these new claims are totaling?
I'm aware of the figure, but I don't want to make that known at this time. I don't want to be pushing their case. Let them argue how much their claims are and what they're for.
First claim is about to be resolved. The initial one.
But that one has been in the public domain
Right.
for a while, and that was a claim for 50 million, I think it was.
Okay, and where is that? Is that closer to be resolved?
No, that's what I just said to you. Last week, they had oral hearings. They had to make written submissions to the DAB. Then they had in Miami the presentation by our lawyers, and they have, I think, the 15th of January to make some supplementary presentations, and thereafter, I think by the end of the month, they will rule on the matter. So if the parties accept that, their claims would be settled if they accept the ruling. If the parties decide not to, then you go to full arbitration.
And the salary levels?
It would be hard for me to tell you a figure like how many public servants would go to $200,000. It's a figure that I guess they would have to run through their database and come up with. A significant part of the public servants, though, significant part will hit the 200,000 mark.
And lastly, Mr. Jagdeo, I've heard you repeatedly talk about renegotiations and so on, but I think the question still remains on the lips of Guyanese. What does Guyana have to lose if it were to formally approach Exxon and say, let us come to the table, given the new realities, the new finds?
But the thing is that they've said clearly to everyone, including us, that they are not they're not accepting renegotiations. The provision that APNU put in the PSA is that it has to be done with the consent of both parties, the agreement of both parties. If one party says no, which they have already said, what do you do then? Then you go to, the next stage is a dispute. You have a dispute. That's where you want us to go at this stage? That's it. And we're not doing things for the show or the PR benefits. People have to think through this. It's not for the show or the PR benefits to satisfy a Glenn Lal or a group in the Stabroek News who think that they're the conscience of the country. It's practical. I think through it logically. That is one thing that we work on, logics.
Right. So, I understand you. What I'm saying is that they formally in writing said to the government, we will not renegotiate, as opposed to just saying it in the public domain, probably in a conversation. And what is wrong with taking it to a dispute resolution process?
As I said before, we're not dealing with the optics. We're dealing with substance. If you want to deal another party, you can ask this question. I made it clear already. We're not dealing with optics, we're dealing with substance. That's AFC and the others can deal with optics. They did that before. They're the ones who signed the agreement. Now suddenly they think, oh, we should renegotiate the agreement. The PNC, I don't know what their position is because every day it changes. That's one thing with the PPP. You're not going to get a PR politics. We do it because we've seen it. We need also to lock in all the investments we can get now for the country. All the investments we can get now. We've seen how hard it is to get investments in this area. That's why we announce a particular type of depletion policy. There's a consistency with our positions. Our positions are not like every day, they're not developed on the fly, which press conference we go to. From right back when we announced a particular, we said we will renegotiate the other contracts, which we did, the 5 other contracts. We'll not touch this one for the following reasons. We laid out the reasons. We said we have a particular depletion policy for the following reasons. And we've remained true and faithful to that all along. And that's why we're getting $60 billion US of investment now, which is 7 times more than all the accumulated savings in our entire banking system. I don't hear the Glenlal talk about savings or AFC or where you would finance these ventures from, or the occasional editorials. Sometimes you need that. There are lots of countries that have found oil that can't get it out of the ground.
So then, is there a risk to take it to the resolution?
There is, it's the loss of momentum. I explained that earlier, Dennis. You understand, right? The loss of momentum. That is the fear. The momentum. It's that's invaluable at this time. Invaluable given net zero, given the need to raise, the loss of momentum. And if people want a government that could be fickle-minded, they can have one like APNU. And next thing the people buy, they signed, they did the agreement for cabinet. They did the cabinet paper. How shameful can you get? And these are the same people you want to think that they could ever do policy making in any sector, including the oil and gas sector. So who would take them seriously? And then look at it too. It's Norton, it's Lowe, it's Paul. It's the same Patterson who's an inveterate, a liar. We prove him a liar in so many things. He lied in Parliament about their mileage fall, 30 cents per kilowatt hour. He lied about the Exim Bank loan. He lied about the SOPs that they had that showed Mingo stuff. And we still turn to these people for policy. We're not gonna, the PPP will never do that. We're straight with the people of this country. We're straight with them. Not gonna say things for convenience. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jagdeo.
Yes, good afternoon.
This question is in line with the cash grants and the amount of persons that would have received so far. My question is it in line or expectations with the government's expectation, the amount of persons that would have received so far?
So I'm pleased that they actually registered 366,000. Remember, we made provisions in the supplementary for 300,000, right? Where it's $30 billion. So they've registered 366,000 persons. They've cut 245,000 checks so far. So I anticipate by the end of the year, they'll be able to cut 300,000 checks. 100,000 persons have received the checks so far. So we will have between the beginning of the year to about February, when hopefully the budget would be passed, to deliver these checks to people, the remainder that were cut but not delivered as yet. And then in that very same period, we'd be able to register people from the other 5 regions. So once the budget is passed, we'll put the additional sum of money in the budget, if it's 30 billion or 35 billion, whatever it is, in the budget, so that we'd be able to cut checks immediately thereafter the budget is passed for the remaining numbers of people. That's how we are planning it out.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo. Ronald
Yes,
Singh
good
here.
afternoon.
Sir, His Excellency spoke last week on an issue of GPL, saying that if they don't get it right in the first quarter of 2025, heads will roll. Are you confident in the management of GPL to get it right first quarter of 2025?
Well, the president made it conditional upon giving them the tools. And one of the tools that he mentioned is this install capacity now. The capacity, the supply of power, which far exceeds their demand. So that means, because they were complaining all along that they were very tight on generating capacity. So now that they have that, I anticipate that the president would be looking for performance. And the performance for us is how much they keep the power on. It's not a big fancy metric. We want to make sure that people have power in their homes and that they don't have frequent blackouts that so irritating and debilitating for many people that we don't want that to happen. So I guess now that they have the generating capacity, it would be easier to isolate what is management from what was just scarcity of generating capacity. So the president has also mentioned that in relation to Gaisuku. These are the two agencies that we expect better performance from.
And another question, is there any plan to look at the system that currently obtains with GPL? You have the Demerara-Berbice interconnected system, so if there is something wrong at Kingston or Gardnerby, then it shuts down the entire. Is there any plan to decentralize this?
So they told me now that the system is infinitely more stable when you have spinning reserves, so that it doesn't trip the whole system. So now that they have spinning reserves, that the system becomes stable. So the problem is that we don't have redundancy too. Is that you have one line taking the power to Berbice. So if something goes wrong with that line, it takes down some of the areas until you fix the line. It's not a circuit. If you had a circuit, then you can take power both ways. Something goes wrong on this end, you take the power on the other end of the circuit. So we have to, that's what we're building in the future. And right now we have tendered for the 230 kVA line to run from Georgetown all the way to Crabwood Creek. Because with us generating 500-600 megawatts here, we need to move that, and the 6 to 9 kVA line can't move that amount of power all the way to Berbice. We're doing the same now to take power to Linden. 230 kVA line would go into that area from Georgetown all the way up to Linden too, or from the East Bank to Linden. So that's part of the grid improvement system that we have currently now. And then they have another tender that is out that I should have been awarded by now. This is about 200 million US to upgrade the current system, put in more transformers, because a lot of areas, the demand is such, but the demand is related to the number of transformers you have. So you may have load shedding, they have to put in more transformers, etc. We're spending about $200 million to do that. So there are lots of different things being put in place to upgrade the system. Generally, to build a smart grid, we have to ultimately get a smart grid for the country that would allow you to do all of these things. Yes.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo. Michael Rodriguez for Daybreak News. Going back to the cash grant, a lot of people might have fallen out of the net of registration, being out of the country, fishermen at sea and so on. What is going to be in place to deal with those persons? A lot of people are asking the question.
If you miss the number of days that those registering people were in your community, you would have another opportunity. We're going to make sure that we announce a supplementary kind of approach, or people may be able to go to the post office, wherever. But you're not going to lose the money if you didn't get an opportunity to register. For example, you're busy on that day or those days, you're out of the country or you're at sea or somewhere else. So the fishermen and the others don't have to worry, or the miners. For example, if you're a miner and you miss the area, you don't have to worry about that.
Dr. Jagdeo, secondly, you come 52 times a year holding a press conference mainly to dispel misinformation by two main media entities, newspapers mainly, that your government is the biggest financiers of. When are you going to keep your promise of making a level playing field as it relates to media, taking into consideration social media is new media, or are you reneging on that promise?
No, I think in the new budget, we'd have to do that. We'd have to look at social media and spend more advertising dollars on social media and those who have reach in the social media. Because the ultimate aim is to reach the citizens of the country. It's not to support a particular entity. And those who reach people, then they should also be able to monetize their platforms and get state support for them. The traditional media often sees this as the monopoly, and they talk about, if you move away from them, like I spoke about Glenn Lal. Glenn Lal has announced he is forming a political party, and he still expects the same amount of private ads and public ads to his paper. We didn't even touch it as yet, but it should not be as a political newspaper. But they've come to almost expect this as a God-given right. They talk about competition and everything else, but it's a God-given right that they must have all of these things. I think we also need to amend some of the laws which speak of, for example, the Procurement Act, which says that you have to advertise in 2 newspapers or something like that. So I think we need to do that, to say we need to probably advertise widely rather than just 2 newspapers, for it to be acceptable. I think that has to change in the new year. We need to reach more of our people, and some of our people don't even read the newspapers, frankly speaking. Most of our people, in fact, based on a survey, don't read newspapers. They get their news from social media. So you're absolutely right. But on the fact, we are not doing this to kill any newspaper, even if they're hostile to us. We're painfully aware that we live in a democracy, and people will have different views, and they will try to distort views. Glenn Lal has a political motive, and so his whole program is not to get to the truth or to even understand the challenges of the oil and gas sector. He wouldn't even understand it if you explain to him. But it is to serve a political interest. And if a newspaper has a particular editorial policy to help political parties or a particular political party, there's nothing you can do about it except what we're doing every week, give people an alternate view. So then when they read these stories, then they can see how biased they are. That's all I can do here, which is to give people another perspective. Because if they don't have that perspective, they may actually believe that the people who try to steal the elections are the champion of democracy and who've had a history of stealing elections for all their lives, being the champion of democracy. If you don't do that, especially young people.
Dr. Jagdeo, thirdly, in the interest of transparency and accountability without invading anyone's privacy, are you aware if Mr. Nigel Hughes, Ms. Cathy Hughes, and Aubrey Norton would have signed up for their cash grant and would have received it?
I'm not going to disclose that. They have a right as Guyanese. I always defend the right of Guyanese. If Norton gets into trouble, he is a Guyanese too. He is entitled to the same benefits and also, you know, under the law. So they're all eligible as Guyanese over 18 years old. And I saw Norton showed his check. I think his pay slip, right, in Parliament, and he was he confirmed that it's $1.8 million. I said emoluments and allowances per month, 1.8 million. That was not the whole thing. He didn't show like the 30-something million dollars he received for his office, which is closed most of the time to run his office. And but I don't want to get into Norton's king. I saw he took great offense about me talking about their lack of experience in running anything. Like he was junior and my Paul and all of that. And it's true. It's true. He didn't disprove it. So he said, when I became minister, I didn't have much experience too. But the thing is that you can't, I went through that before I became president. And for a whole year, I worked in the Ministry of Finance as an advisor before I became minister. So, and I was dealing with almost every policy issue from IMF negotiations. If you talk to Asgar, you'll find out we were involved in everything to reforming a lot of the places, almost every system, because nothing worked in that period. So before I became minister. And so you're vying for the presidency. And never had a single day.
Could you tell us a bit about what is the criteria used to arrive at the minimum wage?
The criteria for the minimum wage. What criteria do you think? Criteria do you think countries should use?
I don't
when
know.
you pay your staff, Dennis.
I'm asking you, Mr.
No, yes. But when you pay your staff, it's the same criteria. You look at affordability generally. Affordability, one, for the Treasury, and two, comparable payment for the same work. Comparable payment for the same work. I told you already that at the lower end, the state sector wages are more competitive than even some of the banks. That's comparability and affordability. These are things that business, that's why I wasn't trying to be facetious, but I was just telling you that that's how you work with it. Because let me leave it there. Those are the two criteria.
The reason I ask is because when one considers even the basic that's required by, say, a mother and her kindergarten child, for instance, when you look at the basic calculations,
I don't want to go down there.
It comes down to more than $140,000 a month.
We have gone there before, and I don't want to go down there. So, for example, when we were earning $25 per month, that was the average wage in the public service in the 90s. Where was this concept of affordability? In Nigeria, if you look at North Nigeria, the per capita GDP is $286 per annum. That's per capita GDP, North Nigeria. They have a dispute now between North and South because they're attempting to change the formula for allocation of the taxes. So it's topical in the news. The pensioners in this country will, from this next year, get $200 a month. In that country, in North Nigeria, it's $286 per year. That's the per capita GDP. If you multiply the 200 per month, that's $2,400 a year that our pensioners will get, plus the subsidized water and subsidized electricity. Look where it has grown. So countries have to look at growth and affordability and sustainability, all in mapping these issues out. So what do you think when it was $25? What criteria were they using there? We were bankrupt. We were bankrupt as a country. There was nothing about affordability. Today, at $100,000, it's about $500. About $500. That's where we have come from, $25 over the years. And if you want to look at affordability and that sort of thing, and people, when you took 7,000 people out of the sugar industry who were earning a living and put them on the breadline, they didn't even have the 100,000 to live on. They had nothing. That was the contrast. That's the kind of contrast I want done between PPP and APNU. And when you look at the 2020 to 2025, public sector wages will grow by $100 billion per year. And nobody has disputed that from the other side. $100 billion per year, which is $500 million per year more in the pockets of public sector workers. Then you see the effort that this government has made in public service wages too. But that doesn't get written about. Because they can't dispute it, it doesn't get written about. But then you hear somehow, oh, we're shortchanging public servants. And it is, if you look at the 10% that we got now, at 10% on all the years in APNU, you got less than 10%. But at 10% in 2015 will be less than 30% of what it is today because of the magnitude of the money on the base year. You notice they didn't come back on any of those issues. They would not come back on that, but they're going to run around and say, oh, the cash grant is being paid to dead people now. That's their way of dealing with that. Every time we do a technical piece, Norshan show his pay slip. He was cussing the president and lied on the man and said he is earning 2.8 million a month. And when I talk about his 1.8, which is factual, he went and showed his pay slip and all of that, and his pay slip proved that. Notice all of these things. That's the switching all the time. Move from the PPP's achievement to going to, oh, now we got to go and index it to some, how do you determine it? How do you determine it? Those are the ways you determine it. So I don't want us to get into another minimizing what the PPP has achieved versus APNU's low levels of achievement again. That's why I'm General Secretary of the party. I have to every week point this out. I hope you're right about the 100 billion, Dennis. I'd like to see a story on the 100 billion. Yeah, no, but yes, 100 billion. But you go wrong too and find out how many people more are owning homes and cars and getting a big wage and they're shopping in some of the same markets, etc. You go wrong and see what's happening and find out how many people more are working now than were working 4 years ago and how much wages. You need to look at that side of the equation too. Yes. I will give you, I promise to give you the wages one, and I hope you put a nice table for me in the Demrar Waves for the table because it could be verified. And ask the others, do you think that the government is lying, the PPP government, when they put out these numbers? Yeah. That's why I'm going to US dollars. That's why I said 100 billion or 500 million US dollars to address that very same issue, so you don't come with a question like that.
Jarabayan
Yes.
Evening News.
Yes.
Circling back to the cash grant, what systems are in place for persons who would have registered locally, but for some reason they had to leave the jurisdiction while the checks are being shared out and so on?
Well,
Is
the
it-
checks would be cut. We're not going to take back the checks. So when they come back, hopefully they're coming back, right? Or are they coming back? These are coming back. Because the idea now is to give the people whose photo is on the registration form, the checks. So we don't get a dead man collecting it, etc. Like APNU just waiting for one person of the 600 or 700,000 persons. They're waiting for one screw up, and then they would make that as though that is the whole thing. So we're gonna make sure that people get their money. The idea is though, once you register in your Guyanese, we're not begrudging our people or trying to shove them. We're making sure if they're Guyanese, they will get it. They will get it. Okay? So if you know the person and they come back, we'll arrange. Once they could go online too, maybe, and verify. Maybe we'd put that. You could actually, might be a good idea. You can go online, they take your picture online to see you're the real person. And then you can get your check posted to you. That might be a good thing. The idea just came across my head. If he is abroad now, he or she. Yeah. Anything else? If not, thank you very much. Oh, you go? Okay. All right, go ahead, yeah. They APNU and AFC had a press conference today. They didn't? Oh, they've been hiding a lot. And they're doing this wickedness with their access in and all of that. So you can't ask them tough questions.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon again. This is in relation to the cash grant again. As it relates to some homeless persons out on the road, I mean, some of them may have ID. Is there any provisions in place for them to get registered and receive the cash grant as well?
If you're home, it doesn't say you have to have an address. I think the key thing is your face and your identification. So not if you register in Myconi, you have to have a specific address like what APNU want. I don't know how we're gonna deal with this, the homeless. That's something we can think about, but they're eligible. But we'd probably have to find a way of, I don't know how, but think through that. Once we get through the getting most people. And I don't want people to rip off the homeless people too. You know, you have a good set of Guyanese. Next thing you have my Paul collecting all these homeless people and stuff like that. I'm bringing them in. I don't trust my Paul to collect these homeless people. All right, thank